This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the late 2019 edition of the Dell XPS 13. The model number is 7390. Yeah, they kind of jumbled the numbers around a little bit just to challenge us. But anyway, late 2019 edition with Intel 10th generation CPUs. What's interesting here is instead of the new 10th generation Ice Lake CPUs that we're seeing in a lot of competing Ultrabooks that are very compact 13.3-inch, Dell decided to go with Comet Lake, so that's potentially more powerful, particularly with the Core i7 that adds more cores, up to 6 cores, and that's the model we have. We're going to look at it now. So in terms of design, you wouldn't be able to tell this from the previous generation. It's really the same. You have 3 color choices. You have the one that we have, which has been around for a long time. Now it's still nice. Silver outside and the black carbon fiber interior. Or there's a rose gold with the white weave interior, and that's a glass fiber interior that's made of some kind of silicon crystal material that's pretty durable. And then there's also the alpine white, which is, well, whiter. So Dell says the white interiors are even whiter. They added more titanium dioxide. Those of you who are painters actually know what that means. So a little bit more white pigment to make it look a little whiter. Otherwise, it's the same. It's pretty durable. It doesn't tend to yellow. Good times that. Still a unibody aluminum construction. Very sturdy, very dense. Never a complaint there. Still dongle hell here. We're looking at USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 ports. You get 2 Thunderbolt 3 40 gigabit per second ports. One of these will be used for charging, by the way. And a USB-C Gen 1 that does support DisplayPort and power delivery. And you have a headphone jack, yay, and a micro SD card slot. And that's pretty much it for your connectivity. As ever, a very small footprint, very light, 2.8 pounds, which is 1.23 kilograms and 11.6 millimeters thin. The keyboard in this also is unchanged and still backlit in white, 1.3 millimeters of key travel. A little harsh and abrupt on the finger joints, but you get used to it. Dell's been doing this forever and a lot of other manufacturers, so it's a normal keyboard at least, albeit just short travel. And we have a Microsoft Precision trackpad. For displays, just like last gen, you have your full HD IPS option, and that's a matte non-touch display. And then there's the one we have, which is the 4K glossy touchscreen. Gorilla Glass 4 on top, but they say there's a 0.65% anti-reflective coating. It still looks glossy, trust me on that, but it helps a little bit with the ambient reflections, and Gorilla Glass tends to be highly reflective. But, you know, in a bright environment. Happily, though, that 4K display, we measured it at 470 nits, which is exceptionally bright, so that can combat a lot of glare. So the rest of the metrics of the display, you can see them on screen. This is one of those full sRGB and around 76% of Adobe RGB displays. It's not a wide gamut display, but it's nice and it's pretty well color calibrated from the factory in terms of, you can see the color accuracy graph there. So they did a good job. And typically their full HD display is quite nice too with similar gamuts. So yeah, Dell does a good job. And of course you have the Infinity Edge, nearly no bezels on the edge, and a smaller than ever webcam. Fingerprint scanner is optional. You can get that embedded in the power button. It works pretty decently on this. By the way, if you like this but you want a 2-in-1 version, we already reviewed the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1 edition, and that one does use Intel Ice Lake. Go figure. But that one's a convertible, and that one supports a pen. Starts at more than this one does, so you pay extra for the convertible feature. Speaking of pricing, this starts at about $950, but that gets you a very low-end configuration. The full HD display, a Core i3 dual-core, 4 gigs of RAM, and a 256 gig SSD. So probably that's not the one that you're going to want. Ours, configured with the Core i7 16 gigs of RAM, which is the max, and a 512 gig SSD 4K display, is around $1,600. So it's a premium laptop. It ain't cheap, that's for sure. So let's talk about those processors. Again, Intel 10th generation Comet Lake. What does that mean? That means that it's the same architecture as Whiskey Lake, and we've thrown some more cores in, but only for the Core i7. So you can get a Core i3 and you can get a Core i5, which is a quad core, just like the previous generation. And the Core i7 is up to 6 cores for potentially a lot more computing power. And on the benchmarks, it looks as good as, say, an Intel 7th gen 45-watt laptop like an XPS 15. Not bad. Now keep in mind though, with benchmarks, most of them are pretty short runs. So even if you run them over and over again, you get a little chance for it to cool down. So it doesn't have the full stamina of a 45-watt CPU, even if you're looking back at 7th gen. If you're doing something that takes sustained long high output, like say exporting a 4K video in Adobe Premiere, still better to choose a 15-inch mobile workstation sort of laptop for that, or gaming laptop. But it does certainly lift above its very minimal weight. It's a pretty impressive jump in performance. The alternative would be the 10 nanometer Ice Lake architecture, which stays at quad core for the Core i7, and that's what's in the XPS 13 2-in-1, the HP Spectre X360 13-inch with OLED display that we just reviewed. You get the idea. So this one is a little bit faster, particularly if you're going to go with that Core i7. That's where you're going to see the biggest jump in performance. In graphics, however, you're not going to see much of a jump in performance because they're sticking with Intel UHD graphics. They don't even call it 620 anymore, maybe because they don't want you to think about it. It's the same graphics as the last generation. So where Ice Lake got faster Intel Iris Plus graphics, this one sticks with the same. So it depends on what your needs are. If you want more graphics on because you like to play some games, if you're doing even that video that I was talking about, video editing, there are times when the GPU can help, even an integrated Intel Iris Plus sort of GPU there. It's a tough decision to make, but for people who are doing a lot of number crunching and that sort of thing, well, or even coding, and that's mostly a CPU intensive, so that's what you should go with there. In terms of noise, we have 2 fans now, but it does not get loud. I mean, you'll hear it if you're really pushing it hard, but it's more like your typical Ultrabook hiss and not a roar. And in terms of temperatures to the skin, really Dell has done a pretty good job with that over the years. And we have that Gore insulation, so that's supposed to help keep the CPU a little cooler by dissipating heat while having your legs not fry. It is still a thin metal Ultrabook, so you'll feel heat on the bottom, but usually it's not burning hot unless you really are doing something like a 4K video export or compiling an incredibly big million lines of code program, which is probably not what you're going to usually use a 13-inch Ultrabook for anyway. So it's decently well controlled. That CPU will jump up in temperature, though. Dell lets it freely fly there right up to the thermal throttle point. So that means you can see it hit near 100 degrees centigrade for core temperatures, which is max allowable. But again, only if you're benchmarking or really, really pushing it hard. Otherwise, it typically runs in the 40s and the 50s centigrade for moderate work. Battery life will depend on whether you get the 4K display or the full HD. 4K, more pixels to push around, so shorter battery life. And yes, by the way, even if you set the resolution lower, that's still the case because there's still that many physical pixels to drive on the display. Same 52 watt-hour battery that we've seen, same 45 watt charger, identical in fact. I am surprised Dell hasn't gone with the 65 watt at this point, which a lot of competitors have to speed up charging some, but on the flip side, at least it is a really, really tiny little charger. We have the 4K with the Core i7, so this is the worst case for battery life. And with the display set to 200 nits of brightness, we've averaged about 7.5 hours of light to moderate productivity work. Obviously, it's going to be shorter if you're pushing it harder, doing something more challenging. And if you get the full HD display, Dell says expect around 2.5 hours more battery life. It's pretty easy, say if you go with that Core i5 instead of a Core i7 and the full HD display, to expect to get something up to 10 to 11 hours if you're minding your battery and using the Dell performance power profiles to optimize for battery life versus performance. So it's decent. It's not bad. To get inside the XPS 13, well, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that the Torx T5 screws are readily visible and easy to remove. The bad is that, boy, the plastic clips are tenacious. You really have to work a credit card around the edges of this to get it off. And the ugly is, well, the edges here, some of them are kind of sharp. So don't let it pinch down and, like, cut your fingernail or whatever, you know. So there you have it. Nice metal bottom removed, and there's our internals. Not much really different from the previous generation. We have our 52 watt-hour battery here. We have speaker drivers that are located on each side, right there and there. And we have our M.2 SSD under a heat dissipating cover right there. And we have Gore insulation, Dell tells us, which helps keep it cool and help us stay cooler as well. 2 fans, that's nice to see, but now we're up to 6 cores. Boy, you need a little help there, especially for something this thin and light. The Wi-Fi card is soldered on. You can see the antenna leads here, and this is the Wi-Fi chip, and RAM is soldered on, so you can't upgrade the RAM later, get it with the amount that you want. So that's the Dell XPS 13 7390 for late 2019. More of the same thing, but that's probably a good thing because people really love this laptop for a reason. Super well built. Nearly no bezels on this. Good performance. 4K display option, full HD. If you don't want to push all those pixels around, it's all there for you. And a lot of Thunderbolt connectivity. Legacy ports, not so much. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit that notification bell too.